Welcome everybody. This is a walking writers salon, and it's produced by Walk, Listen, Create. And Walk, Listen, Create is a not-for-profit, and we support writers, artists, and performers who make work about walking. And we have about 2,000 contributing members at the moment. So we're very pleased to have you, and anyone who's new here and hasn't come across us before, you're very welcome. And you can add things like bio and profile and links to your books and blogs and things. So how this event will run is I'll just about to introduce Phoebe, and she and I will have a chat for about 10, 15, 20 minutes. Hopefully that'll inspire you to ask her questions, and we'll end with a multiple choice quiz in which her publisher Harper North have very kindly offered a couple of prizes. So that's how the process works. And so let me start by introducing Phoebe. Now, Phoebe has sent me a biography. It's quite long, but bear with us. She's an adventurer and a multi-award winning travel writer, most recently Sustainable Travel Writer of the Year, Trav Media Awards in 2024, a photographer, presenter and broadcasting, specializing in adventure, sustainable travel, walking, family adventure and wildlife conservation. She's presented segments on TV, including BBC Countryfile, BBC Breakfast, Channel 5 Saturday Live, ITV's Britain's Best Walks and BBC Breakfast. She's also, now this is intriguing, sleep storyteller in residence at Calm. Seems to be a bit of an oxymoron, but maybe we'll get onto that, where her stories have been listened to over 30 million times and been narrated by Stephen Fry, Joanna Lumley, Cillian Murphy, Jerome Flynn, Bindi Irwin, and Danae Gurira, to name a few. She's the author of 11 books, of which her most recent is Wayfarer, Love, Loss, and Life on Britain's Pilgrim's Paths. It's been shortlisted as the Edward Stanford Travel Book of the Year 2025, been named as an FT Best Summer Read, and winning the Inspire Global Award 2025 for Travel Book of the Year. She's also co-founder of the We Too Foundation, a charity that empowers underprivileged young people through carbon negative expeditions. She lives in Oxfordshire, but is originally from North Wales. So I'd usually say that my guest book has been a real pleasure to read, but Phoebe's written something that's very candid and in parts quite a shocking book. It's been a great read, but it's made me feel a little uncomfortable. And the book is full of quotable material, perhaps a journalist at work, but I turned the corner of scores of pages where I found something I could refer to in this salon. So was it always your intention, Phoebe, to write a book?
No, is my answer. I with this particular book, no, absolutely not. Every book I've written before has been definitely something I wanted to do. With this, it came the other way round. I started almost by accident writing or walking pilgrim trails out of an intense need that I didn't really understand at first. And it was only kind of when I came out the other side of it that I thought I'd quite like to write a book about pilgrimages because they quite literally saved my life. And I say that as a non-religious person. And I really wanted to just capture them and show people that they are a possible outlet, possible way of overcoming trauma like they helped me do. And but wasn't going to make it that personal. And when I first of all proposed the book, it was definitely not the book that it's ended up as, but I found through the process of writing it, um, it kind of evolved and there were certain things I just couldn't keep out of it.
Okay, well, that's an interesting way of saying it. When you say you proposed it, did you propose it directly to a publisher or to a literary agent?
So I do have a literary agent who, anyone who has had a literary agent or knows literary agents, she was so waiting for me to propose a book for so long. And I actually proposed a book about pilgrim paths about 3 years before this one. which, like I said, was very different, just something I wanted to just talk about pilgrim paths. And it was a very lovely kind of sounding book. And we did pitch that. It got so far and then it kind of floundered. And then I lost interest in doing it. Life went on. And then it was during lockdown. Harper Collins established Harper North to champion authors that have a northern connection. And they got in contact with me and my literary agent and just said, I'm sure everyone remembers during lockdown, people were reading and people were buying books and they wanted to know if I had any ideas. And I was like, oh, well, there is this book I had been wanting to write. And again, kind of sent them the pitch that I had done when it had been going previously, but they wanted more detail. And so I gave them a bit more. And it was when I was writing that I realized, oh, there might be a bit more personal stuff in this than I thought I would do, but that's okay. And then when I actually got around to writing it, yeah, like I said, it developed substantially from there.
Okay, because previously, this is the first book of yours I've read, but you've written guidebooks as well, haven't you? So you know, and now we know you're a kind of storyteller in residence for this bizarre, calm podcast, which is obviously hugely popular. So tell us, what's the difference between, you know, had you written previously about paths? Obviously, I think as a guidebook, I'm guessing, but did you find that a difficult jump to move from one to the other, to move to part memoir, part nature writing?
Yeah, so I had written sort of a narrative book before. I wouldn't call it a memoir because even though I talked about myself, it was very much written in the style of how I would have written a travel feature. You know, it was, I definitely was told, when I first started writing, it was called Extreme Sleeps, came out back in 2013. And when I first wrote it, I did write it a bit more memoir-esque. And I was told by the publisher to not make it too personal, and actually they wanted something a bit more uplifting or a little bit more light-hearted. And so I did. I completely changed how I was writing it. And there's always a adage that you either write yourself as like the hero or like the fool. And I decided, or was certainly urged, to make myself the fool in that book. And you know, and it was kind of a warts and all, going from a normal woman, in quotes, sleeping in a proper bed with a mattress and a duvet, and then falling in love with wild camping and the wilderness in my own country. And but it was very much warts and all the mistakes I made, but also a real celebration of UK landscape. So I was used to kind of combining myself in the landscape, but then, like you said, I moved to doing a lot of guidebooks because my urge was to empower others to go into the outdoors and experience some of what I was experiencing. But I did it in a very journalistic way of, you know, I was always trained that you're the eyes and the ears on the ground for the reader and you're just the conduit for them to see it or experience it. And it's not about you. And that's kind of then what I lived. And I was just doing that. And I think it was so Raina Wynn, as everyone probably has heard of, who wrote The Salt Path, that's just about to come out in film, starring Gillian Anderson. She actually mentioned me in one of my books, in The Salt Path. And she emailed me before it came out, before it became hugely successful, and asked if it was okay to have name checked me. And in it, she kind of is a little bit sort of disparaging on, oh, Phoebe was just doing that, but it was just for fun. And I was going through this really personal thing. And something about that hit me that I thought, that's not true. I was going through a lot of personal things, but you just didn't know about it because I didn't write it in the book. And I think that kind of struck a bit of a chord with me. And then when you know, years later, that would have been when she contacted me about 2017, it must have kind of rattled around in my head. And it was definitely as I'd been coming out of this major kind of traumatic period of my life that then when I actually started writing Wayfarer and it just started coming out of me, and I brought in the personal details about my childhood, about very abusive relationships, about having problems with food and control of it, and being controlled by others and being in coercive relationships, like it all just started to come out. And I remember when I sent it to Ray and asked if she would have a look at it with a view to giving me an endorsement for it, she said, wow, Phoebe, I feel like I've known you for all these years, but I've only finally met you by reading this book. And so I knew I definitely kind of crossed over that line. And it's, yeah, it's a massive thing as a writer, and especially as someone who's used to being the journalist or the presenter or the broadcaster that's kind of not the story themselves. I'm always about finding other people's stories. And I think I mentioned in Wayfarer that, you know, it felt in some of the relationships I was in that it was a dangerous place to explore myself. And so I wrote about the world. And this was kind of me flipping that on its head and
Yeah,
actually
escape,
showing.
yeah, escapism.
Yeah,
Escape,
yeah.
almost r- uh, traveling as far and as fast as you can to get away from wherever you're. But yeah, no, I mean, I think the other thing that people will discover when, and we ought to find out whether there are people in the audience who've actually read the book, because there might be a few there already who've read the hardback, because we're at the time of the paperback publication. But I mean, it's an unusual book in as much as you say you've revealed a lot about yourself, but you actually jump from one, describing the sort of histories of the path to, the nature that surrounds you, and then whoosh, we're suddenly into something pretty climactic from your personal life. And I wondered whether that was, when you were drafting the book, maybe you didn't draft it, maybe you wrote it just once, but I have my suspicion you might have drafted it quite a bit. Um, did you intend that that's how it would be, or was that your publisher or agent saying, or actually, you could do this and make it? Yeah, do you see what I'm
Um,
saying?
yeah, no, so I drafted it all in one go. I'm very much a brain dump kind of writer. Like I plan it, so I knew how many chapters, I knew what pilgrimage I wanted to center each chapter on, and then I had a separate um, sub subtext going on with that, and that came from the fact that I walked many more pilgrim trails than I talk about in Wayfarer, but I pulled out ones that I did at certain times when I was going through certain things that I couldn't. And when I pulled those pilgrim paths out to write about, there were certain emotions, certain things that were going on that were happening in parallel when I did them. And at first, when I thought I would just write, and it definitely wasn't my publisher, because they were certainly shocked when they got the manuscript, but they liked it, but it wasn't what they were expecting. And even my literary agent, before she sent it, said, "Now, are you sure you're happy going this personal in it?" But what I realized writing about pilgrimage was that the whole process of being on a pilgrimage is that this is what happens to you. You are walking and learning about the history and, you know, seeing the sights and immersing yourself in the landscapes and the stories and the people you might meet. But at the same time, there is an awful lot of time in these walks where you're not doing that. You are just replaying things, and things come to you and you're thinking of memories, you're thinking of situations. Could be what you're doing at the time, it could be something from the past, it can be a smell that you smell that triggers something that takes you back somewhere. And so for me, it was very important to recreate what happens to you walking a pilgrimage through the narrative. It's not ever just, I'm on this walk now and I'm looking at this flower and this is the history and this, it's all of that. It's all of that's happening at the same time. And learning about this, going to this church and learning about the history of, say, Saint Hilda, this saint who was one of the very few women saints up in Yorkshire, and what she went through and what she did to elevate others cannot help but trigger memories of you, and you start thinking about yourself and what you've done and what you've seen. And I think that's definitely, it was purposely done to keep going backwards and forwards, and that's why I played with the tenses, so that when I was on the trail it was in the present tense, so that you'd know when I'd switch back to past tense that I was going deep inside myself for a memory. And you'll notice when you read it that the trail themes definitely pull out themes in my own life. And I feel like before pilgrimage, before I did any of these things, I always felt like history wasn't a subject for me. Like I never would have considered myself like a history buff or someone that was really into that. But I learned so much about British history walking and studying pilgrimages. And I suddenly realized that by learning more about British history, I understood more about the country as it is today. And in a similar vein, by doing these walks, I retrod some of my own history and then started to understand why I'd become the person that I'd become today. And, you know, I think I say in the book, you can't forge a new path forward until you go back and revisit how you got there. You know, if you don't know where you're going, if you are literally lost, as I felt, you retread your steps till you get back to that point where you knew who you were or where you were, for you to be able to go forward. And that's definitely what the whole book really does, I think.
Well, okay. So, I mean, one of the things you talk about in the book is you say that when you're a journalist, you with you know, when you've got the journalist hat on, that you actually find your notebook is a great shield. It takes you away from the scene, and it allows you just by writing something in a notebook, you can sort of get back into being the observer rather than being involved. And what was clear was that when you were walking some of these pilgrim routes, especially with other people, you found that a difficult thing. You actually did get immersed in what was going on, and couldn't be an impartial observer. But what I'm kind of intrigued by is writing about the walking more therapeutic to you than the walking? So what would you know, you've mentioned that going on the pilgrim walks was really involving for you. It was helpful for you. It worked your way through different issues. But actually, was it the walking, or did you actually find that writing about the walking and then recanting the memories, which was stronger?
I think they both had their magic. I think that doing the walking definitely helped a lot. I think I should say that, so I walked the paths, and I've always written. Written has been a way of helping myself. I kept a diary when I was a kid. You know, words are a real kind of source of strength for me. And when I haven't understood something, I'll just scribble stuff down, and, you know, something that's happened in my life. So words have always been important. But with these pilgrim paths, so some of them I was making notes on because I was there as a journalist, and so I definitely had good notes. Others, I was in such a crazy place. I remember so distinctly the thoughts and feelings, but I did go back when I was writing the book and rewalk them with a clearer head to notice more about the nature, about the landscape, about the history, to really do that with a clear head so I could bring the two together. But writing the book was incredibly cathartic, absolutely incredibly cathartic. Whenever one of my friends now says about something really hard they're going through, I'm like, have you written it down? Like, I found I was almost dreading writing the book at once. I knew in my heart, without telling my agent, without telling the publisher what kind of a book it was going to be, once I knew that's what it had to be, that was the story I had to tell, um, I I kind of I was a bit worried about doing it, but actually, as soon as I allowed myself to do it unfiltered, which is how I always write a first draft anyway, um, I couldn't turn it off. It's like turning on a tap and not being able to turn it off. And I didn't realize quite how therapeutic it was until I got to the end and wrote it. And, you know, there were times when I was writing and crying. There were times when I was writing and laughing. I went through the whole roller coaster of emotions. Writing it, but it genuinely did help. Yeah, it's hard to separate the two because I had to do the walking at the time, and some of them definitely had to, and it definitely saved me. But I was in a different place when I wrote the book, but it helped me work through some of the things I don't think even I'd completely got through when I walked, and actually made me understand things a lot better as well.
Yeah, because I mean, also in the book you talk about the fact that when you have been invited to go on a walk, and people talk about, oh, it's a fantastic opportunity of being creative. You've thought, or you've said, or you've written that you've not actually really had any creative thoughts. In fact, you're a bit like me. I find the same. Sometimes you get trapped in your head, some kind of memory or some kind of issue, which is actually very negative, and you just can't get rid of it. You can't, you know, because you're walking and you've got to get to wherever you're going, and all the repetitiveness of putting one foot in front of the other doesn't allow you to be all that creative at all. I mean, it was really interesting. We had Polly Atkin on as a guest earlier in the year, and there's so much being published at the moment about, oh, how nature cures you.
Yeah, yeah.
all that kind of thing. And she's written a book where it basically didn't cure her. And she's actually written about the fact that it doesn't work for everybody. So I'm quite intrigued. Do you think with the walking, do you think it is something that for you now, do you find that when you go for a walk or you would go on a pilgrimage walk, you've managed to, I know you've managed to get out these issues out, and you don't now need, they don't come back at you. Have you?
Look, I don't think walking is a cure-all magic pill. No one should have to go on antidepressants or have therapy or deal with things. I think it's never a bad idea to try going for a walk because the very worst case scenario, it's still been a nice walk. It's been good for your body. You've got fresh air. You've had a change of scene, which sometimes can be massively important. I do think it's more important than perhaps it feels at the time. I think it's one of those things that when you look back, it has given you a bit of space and perspective. And you're right. Sometimes you go and definitely that's happened to me. And like you said, I mentioned in the book, sometimes I go intending to solve a problem and actually start thinking about nothing at all. But sometimes that thinking of nothing at all and not actually thinking about the problem I've gone out to solve or the article I've gone out to write or whatever it happens to be, sometimes just not actually doing that and getting lost in the repetitiveness can be very, very helpful, even though it doesn't feel very helpful. And equally, sometimes, like you said, something can just then go around and around in your mind. But I'd almost rather it went around and around and got stuck in my mind being outside in a different environment, in a different scenery. So I think, yeah, does it work every time? Of course not. But I would always recommend trying. And then maybe if you've come back and that thing's still going around your head, then try writing something down about it. Because like I said, that combination of the two things certainly helped me a lot.
Well, okay. I mean, we're sort of 25 minutes in, and we haven't got anything in the chat. So I'm hoping that we can encourage some people to ask some questions in the chat. And also at some point, I'd like you to read something, a passage you might choose.
Sure.
But there's another question I just want to kind of try and see how we get on here. Okay, so there are and you've mentioned it already, is that you do write about controlling relationships, and yet uh, in a strange, and that's something to do with power balance, who has the power and who doesn't. And what you've done now is you've given me an awful lot of power over you because you've written a book where you reveal a lot about yourself, a huge amount, much more than many people would dare to reveal about themselves. And you don't really know very much about me. So I have there is a kind of power balance there. You're almost falling into the trap of, of being vulnerable again.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. I think I would argue the counterpoint,
Okay,
because
good. Exactly. That's what I want.
yeah, I think that, until that point, I felt like people thought they knew me, and people either didn't know me at all, or they knew me, or they thought they knew me, or a version of me, or I had to keep all this stuff about me that wasn't the projected who I am. I had to keep that to myself. And there are things in here that I reveal that I said I never thought I'd tell anyone this. I thought I would take this to my grave. It's these kind of things. But what I realized was that by not talking about those things, they were controlling me. They were impacting me because I was holding on to them somewhere. And I think by taking control of my own narrative, by telling my own story from my perspective and working my way through it, I felt so much more in control of it. If we take the relationship in there with the scientist, so this was someone who, I had this relationship with who then turned out I was the other woman and I didn't realize it until a part way through it, and then it still carried on. But he controlled every way we communicated. He controlled every time we met up, the parameters of our meeting, the things that would happen. He controlled everything. And I think the only way to get back control for myself was to write that down and lay it bare. And what I've found since I've done that is that so many women, particularly, have either written to me or messaged me or come to me at author events and said that a very similar thing has happened to them. Like I've had a lot of people say this could have been me, like this has been me, or this thing that happened to you, that's happened to me. And and that was kind of what I wanted. I felt like there's so much shame put on women, especially, and I can only speak from that really because I am a woman and know that we're supposed to be we're supposed to be, you know, intelligent and witty and hold it together, but yet, and we're supposed to be sexual, but we're not supposed to talk about being sexual, and we're supposed to only have, you know, legitimate approved relationships. But life isn't like that. Like for every, you know, other woman there's a cheating man, and there's, you know, there's so much more at play, but we're never allowed to talk about it, and we're never allowed to admit these things. And I just thought, God, if when any one of these relationships, the abusive ones I had when I was younger, the controlling ones I had more recently, if I'd have read someone like me who appeared to the world as this strong woman who had it together, if I'd have read that actually that's not true, that's just an image, it's like almost like a social media post that, you know, purports to have everything together, but actually there's all this complexedness going on behind the scenes, I would have felt better, and I would have felt empowered, and I would have felt not alone. And I think that's the thing with controlling relationships. You are cut off and made to feel alone and made to feel like there's something wrong with you, and only you are going through this, and you've done something wrong. And so by laying myself bare, the hope was just that it would reach someone who is going through that or has come out the other side of that, and survived it, or is coming to terms with coming out the other side of it. And I just wanted them to know that, you know what, you're not alone, because that's all I wanted to hear throughout all this. I just wanted someone to say, Phoebe, you're not alone. Like this is happening to so many of us, but we're all just keeping quiet about it because we're afraid to reveal it. And I realized revealing it was power. And then so many people, like I said, have come, and, you know, I say it's almost like, if you nod to the whole Christianity religion aspect, this confession, I do get a lot of people write to me confessing things to me, feeling like, well, you've shared this, I'd like to share this with you, I've never told anyone this. Even some of my really good friends suddenly told me things about themselves that had happened that they've never told anyone, and they were like, I don't know why I'm telling you this. And I'm like, well, you don't feel you have to tell me this, but it does seem to be that truth encourages more truth, and openness and honesty is actually, rather than laying yourself out to be vulnerable, it's actually one of the most empowering things that you can do.
Well, thank you for being so honest too. I mean, you know, it comes over very much. I mean, to me, the other interesting side to this is that as a woman um, who goes on walks, and often alone on walks, you know, that's something you've often done and written about as well. Um, is that what I find is that women um, can access far more intimate situations than men can. You know, because, you know, a man can't, you know, approach a woman as easily as a woman can approach a man on a walk. You know, I know it sounds completely mad, but you know, that is the kind of process, and it's kind of strange because I think that has been highlighted a lot in the last decade or so. You know, it's really, and understandably, I guess, but it's to me, it's kind of fascinating that there aren't actually more women writing about more intimate issues. And for you to have written that in what has been defined in a genre, which is a travel book, I mean, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I mean, it's really fascinating. Anyway, the good news is we have got a question in the in the chat, so we'll get to that. But do you want to read something, a passage from the book, or do you not?
Yeah, yeah, no, I can do that. That's not a problem. I'll
Well,
read.
well, no, it's only if you want to, or if you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I'll read one from, this is the start of chapter 6, called Easter. So, at first I think it is the wind, a low constant murmur coming from across the horizon. The water splashes cold against my ankles. My bare feet are already numb from the chill of the air. Curlews call out in the distinctive whistle of theirs, while the scratchy raucous shout of a grey heron completes the tuneless melody. But then all is still. I stop to listen more closely. It isn't the whipping of the wind I can hear, but rather a low, penetrating moan, a ceaseless, tormented lament coming from the southern edges of Lindisfarne. This is the cry of the colony of Atlantic grey seals that live, die, and give birth around the islets and sandbars of the Holy Island in Northumberland. Marine biologists tell us that the seals are communicating, their calls enabling mothers to stay connected to their pups, or simply, as one guide once told me, offering the joy of song, the chance to feel part of a choir. Folklore explains it differently, equating their haunting cries to those of sirens or mermaids who lead sailors to their deaths on shallow rocks. In Scottish mythology, they are selkies, seal-like creatures who shed their skin to walk around on land as beautiful women, leading a great many men to their eventual downfall.
Okay, well, that sounds really impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a good bit of nature thrown in and folklore. Okay, so Alison, do you want to ask your question, or do you want to remain silent and just have Phoebe answer it, and I'll read it out?
No, I can ask. That's absolutely fine. It was just about, because I think this is very common, and despite what you say, Andrew, I think women do feel can feel very vulnerable walking alone. And so my question was, how do you lose that sense of vulnerability?
Do you know what? I think for many years I convinced myself that I had lost it. And I think the more I think, but it's different from that. It's actually you become less sensitive to it. I don't think you ever truly lose it. And I think when I first started going out, and for me, it was going out on wild camping by myself. And the first time I did it, I was told I was working on a walking magazine, and I was basically told, I said, I want to go and do this feature on solo walking and wild camping. So that's camping away, no campsites, out in the hills. And my editor, who was a man, said, oh, you can't do that. And I said, well, Simon did it, who was one of the male staff members. He did it a couple of years ago. And he's like, well, that's different. And I'm like, what? Why is that different? I want to do it. And I am the kind of person that when someone says I can't do something, I am a bit red rag to a bull. And so I said, oh, I'm going to do it. But it was one of the most terrifying things I did at the time, because before I went, I had people saying I was going to be mugged and attacked, and, because I was this woman. And the way I kind of, sort of talked it through was, well, look, as a woman, I'm vulnerable walking down the streets of London at night. I'm vulnerable in a city, at least in the hills. There's not going to be a man lurking in case a solo female wanders through the hills. Like, that's very, very unlikely. Like, I mean, my God, talk about dedication to the cause of just in case. Whereas go on a Friday or Saturday night into a city or town and hang out in an alleyway, you're definitely going to be able to approach someone. So I kind of talk myself like it's going to be all right. But still, in the night when I heard noises, it was like, oh my God, that murderer's coming, that rapist's coming, that someone's coming to get me. And of course they didn't. It was just a rabbit, because it is normally a rabbit or a sheep or wherever you tend to be some kind of animal that you hear. And the more I did it, the less I worried. And now I can go off wild camping on my own and I don't worry about it. But what did make me rethink that was when during lockdown, the Sarah Everard case happened. And I was asked in the wake of that to write a piece about bothies. Now, bothies are mountain huts in the UK that are left open, free to use for hikers and climbers and mountain bikers, and to stay in quite remote places. And you can't book them. There's no sort of privacy, and anyone can be there. Very, very serendipitous, wonderful. And I'd written a guidebook to bothies, and but he said to me, this editor, he said, could you write a piece about what it's like to stay in a bothy as a woman, and what men could do to make women feel more at ease in a bothy? And at first I nearly said to him, like, well, I don't think I need to write this. I don't think there is any danger. But actually, the more I thought about it, I thought, no, do you know, when I go to a bothy, even though I'm not going as a terrified person, assuming everyone's going to attack me, I do go in and I do look around and see who's there. And I am thinking, on some level, is this safe? If there are people there, okay, where do I put my mattress so I'm a respectable distance away? What's my escape route if something goes wrong? And I'm not consciously tick listing these sort of questions, but I am on some level thinking about them. The same as I think most women in this chat will relate to having to walk back to your car from the station when it's dark and you get your car keys and you put them through your fingers just in case someone accosts you in an alleyway. I mean, we don't go around telling everyone about that all the time. We go, oh no, I'm fine walking back. But we do all do that. It's just a thing that men don't have to do or think about. And so I think you never stop being aware of it. You just kind of don't let it, you feel the fear and you do it anyway. And you just go, I refuse to live the life of not doing the things I want to do because of this fear. And if that means taking a risk, then for me, this is a risk worth taking. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are men have worries about these things too. And I've certainly given talks where men have come up to me and asked me questions about kit. They've asked me questions about safety. So I think people have those fears too. But I think with women, it's a different fear. It's less a fear of someone being a horrible person, maybe beating you up. It's more of, it's the bodily fear, isn't it? It's that, will someone encroach on my space and do things to me I don't want them to do, purely just because I happen to be a woman? And I think it is always at the back of our minds. But yeah, it is, in a very long answer to that question, it is just that feel the fear and do it anyway and not let it stop you. But also trust your gut completely is what I would say.
Do you want to say anything more, Alison? You can come back on that, you know.
No, I don't think so. I think it's feel the fear and do it anyway is definitely the right way to go. And being aware, it's exhausting actually, being constantly aware, you know, with the radars turned up high. But yes, I guess doing it more often, you can perhaps turn the radar down a bit. Yeah.
Well, and I think you know, the funny thing about the piece I wrote about the bothies was that we wanted to make it, because I had a good chat with him, and we wanted to make it like, this is what I'm actually thinking about, which I didn't really acknowledge I was thinking about. But then here are some tips for if you're staying in a bothy as a man, what can you do to put, if you go there and there's a woman on her own or women on the, what can you do to put them at ease? And it was things like, you know, if you've got a friend or there's someone with you who's saying inappropriate things, call them out on it. You know, if you get there and they've set a bed up there, make sure you give them that space. Make sure if they need to get changed, you offer them privacy. Just little things that you can do that make a massive difference. And the really funny thing about it was that lots of women who read it and some men were like, this is brilliant. This is really, not only is that highlighting the problem, it's coming up with solutions of what we can do to be allies. And they posted it on Facebook pages to do with bothies in the outdoors, and it actually got removed from being too divisive. And I thought, my God, doesn't that really show? It's not a piece attacking people. It's not a piece saying you're all out there out to get us. It's a piece to say, here's what we have to think about on a day-to-day, which is exhausting. Here's what you can do to make it easier for us. Because really, that's the whole conversation. And we've seen it now with you know, with the recent adolescence film about the whole hypermasculinity and that we've seen that the actual thing is we need to talk to, we can't just be women, how do we cope? It's also the men have to be involved in this conversation to say, how do we be allies and how do we stop our fellow men from being this way? How do we teach our sons not to be a threat? How do we teach them to be how they should be? And I think so, yeah, it's a huge conversation that can just keep going on and being talked about. But it's yeah, it's definitely still there, but there's definitely things we can do.
Well, okay. So,
Thank you.
and thanks, Alison, for bringing that up and calling me out. So I think you're one of the things you talk about also back in the book is you say that you weren't emotionally prepared to undertake some pilgrimages, and you've now said that you people need to be emotionally prepared. So, okay, so we're talking about, you know, let's have it from you. How does one have to be emotionally prepared to undertake a pilgrimage?
I think what I definitely was meaning when I said that was that I wasn't sure I was emotionally prepared to undertake like a proper pilgrimage, to basically admit to myself what I'm doing is a pilgrimage. And I think I was in denial, certainly the first few that I did. You know, that it all started on the Camino de Santiago on assignment as a journalist to write a piece on how you can do the required 100 kilometers of the Camino de Santiago within a week's annual leave. Like that was my remit to go out there. I wasn't in an emotional headspace to deal with all the other issues that can come up when you do a pilgrimage, and the things it reminded me of, you know, meeting a mother-father pair whose mother had died and them trying to fix a bond, and the feelings it would give me about my own complex relationship with my father after losing my mum quite young. I wasn't prepared for that. And when I did the second Pilgrim Trail, which was the first one in Britain, which was with the British Pilgrim Trust, and I did a section of the Old Way, which was this path they found based on the oldest map in existence, which I think was one of the earliest pilgrim trails. You know, again, I still wasn't prepared to admit I was doing this because I needed to dig deep into this kind of my emotional state or my past. Um, and I think it was only as I went on and did more, I thought I have to start accepting that even though I might not be ready, I keep being attracted back to these places. I keep being attracted back to this process of going through it. So I don't think anyone's ever emotionally ready to do it, but it did certainly. Some people, I guess, wake up and go, I need to do the Camino because I want to work this out, or I want to walk a pilgrimage trail because I've got this thing I want to work out. But I think most people go for one reason and then something else happens. And I saw this when I took my friend back onto the Camino and we did a different path. And I saw her go very much as this is a walking holiday, this is going to be fun. And then at the end, when we got to the Santiago de Compostela, she cried and she did not expect to cry. And she said it just so many different emotions and memories and things had brought up that she never expected. And so I don't know whether everyone is always emotionally ready, but the pilgrimage has a way of making you get there or confronting it, either whether you did intend to do it or not.
Well, that kind of moves on. When you know, when is a walk with a purpose? When does it become a pilgrimage? And you know, I mean, you say in the book, a pilgrimage is a lot more than just a physical route, and you're, you know, giving some substance that now. So yeah, when does a walk with a purpose become a pilgrimage? And or what, you know,
I think yeah, I think having a purpose is, you know, because I mean, walking to the shops, you've got a purpose. I suppose it very much depends on what the purpose is, what the purpose is for you. And you know, you could argue, I talk about in the book of when me and my family walked up Tryfan in North Wales to scatter my mum's ashes. I mean, you could argue that was a pilgrimage of sorts to say goodbye to my mum, even though at the time we probably didn't think it was. It was a walk up the hill to do this job. I think definitely the purpose is important that makes it a pilgrimage, but I think also the destination can be important and what that means to you and what that represents. I think that's kind of the broad definition. I think it's got kind of mixed up over time that people think it always has to be to do with religion. You know, we hear now of people doing pilgrimages to go and see, maybe a pilgrimage to one of the ones I sort of did was a pilgrimage back to the places I went to see and visited and lived in of my youth. You know, that's a pilgrimage of sorts, to revisit something, to take something in, to learn something from it. People doing pilgrimages to the football team stadium of a club they've supported for years but never gone to. You know, a pilgrimage to go and see the grave of a singer or a songwriter that they really admire. So I think pilgrimages can be very different things. And I think people have historically, certainly since the Reformation of the Church, where, you know, church and state were separated purely because a man wanted to divorce a woman and marry someone else is why this all happened. But when that happened, we were made to be ashamed of pilgrimage, and it was very much drummed into us that pilgrimages were an indulgence and we shouldn't do them. But if you actually strip away religion, which I'm not religious, so I definitely feel happy about doing, what they actually gave people back in the day when pilgrimages were at their kind of peak, they allowed everyone, no matter where you were in society, whether you were the richest person, a king, even kings did pilgrimages, or you were the poorest person, it was completely acceptable to take leave out of your everyday life to go on a pilgrimage. You could say, I'm going home to the mother church. So the church where you got baptized, which could be hundreds of miles away, and you would take a couple of weeks to go and walk back to your mother church. I mean, that's the whole link between Mother's Day and Easter happens because of that thing. It could be that you were going to walk to go and see one of the, to Canterbury and go pay your respects to a martyr. But no matter what it was, I don't believe that those people every day were giving thanks to God and praying. I think it was that time out and that time to remove yourself from everyday life, to reconnect your mind and body together, to meet new and interesting people who were also going on pilgrimage, because you didn't tend to go as a family. You would go off and you'd meet other pilgrims, and a chance to just kind of have a reset. It's almost quite a mindful thing of like, you're completely allowed to take time out from your job and go and do this. You couldn't do that now. You couldn't go to your boss and go, I just need 2 weeks to go and do this pilgrimage. I want to still be paid to do this. And, it just would never happen. And so by removing, when Henry VIII removed our right for pilgrimage, he actually removed our right to take that time out and just kind of group with ourselves and see where we were going, see where we've come from, and actually ask ourselves questions about whether we're on the right path for us. Maybe make connections with other people. And I think my love of, kind of veering off it slightly, my love of wilderness, wild camping into the outdoors was driven by my desire to get away from things. Like you said right at the beginning, the escapism, the getting away and getting away from people. And I think what pilgrimage does is it brings you back to people. And that's both people from the past, because you're learning about the history of these routes. It's bringing you back to people because all these pilgrim paths, even these new ones that are being rediscovered from old pilgrim routes, most of them, they go through holloways, which are, sections of the earth that have been carved away through footfall over hundreds of years. So you're reconnecting with ancestors in that way. And there's something very powerful about treading ground that human beings have trod before you to try and make that meaning. But it also brings you back to people, because pilgrim trails, by their very nature, went through villages and towns, because the villages and towns built up because of pilgrim trails. All the towns along Galicia on the last 100k of the Camino de Santiago on the St. Francis Way, they built up because there were pilgrims coming through, and we want to serve the pilgrims. So what do? You sell a night to sleep, you sell a meal, you do all that kind of thing. So by walking a pilgrim trail, you are forced back into villages and towns. And if you try it, if you go on one of these walks and you can do a pilgrim path that's a day long, if you nip into someone and someone asks what you're doing, where you're going, the different look or feeling you get from someone if you say I'm on a pilgrimage versus I'm on a walk, it's very marked. And whenever I've said the word pilgrimage, or even talked about particularly the Camino de Santiago, which has become quite famous as a pilgrim trail, people kind of get a very nostalgic look in their face and go, oh, I'd really love to do that. And these are often people who never go walking anywhere for fun, never have expressed any interest about doing a walking holiday or anything, but there's something about that pilgrimage that makes them want to do it. And I think there's some kind of connection with doing that, taking that time out, setting yourself a purpose, allowing yourself that time. And it's hugely powerful. And like I've said a few times, it definitely saved my life.
Phoebe, a big thank you for what you've done. But if you could answer those couple of questions very briefly and then have the last word, okay?
I will do. I'll do as quick fire as I can. So we've got one from Alison who said about, can a pilgrimage be a very short distance? Yes, and I would definitely recommend, if you fancy giving it a go and you're in Britain, look up the British Pilgrimage Trust. They have a whole database of pilgrim routes in the UK, and you can search by, it's completely free to use, you don't have to sign up or anything. It's completely free, but you can sign up, you can look via duration. So if you have a single day, there are some single day pilgrimages, and there are 2 days and longer ones. So yeah, it doesn't matter about the length. Did you encounter a pilgrimage that you expected a personal response, but it turned out to be a nice walk? I think, yes, there are lots like that. And like I said, that's why not every pilgrim path made it into the book. But I would say that on every pilgrimage route, you do get something from it. And you never know what that's going to be. And it could be a chance encounter. It could be something you read on a gravestone or in a church. It could be a bit of a landscape you look up, and you might not get it at the time, but then I often tend to go back and Google certain things or do a bit of research into different landforms, and things are strangely connected is what I've worked out. Things I found, pilgrim routes were connected to others, people from the history were connected to others, and it makes you realize that you yourself are connected to a lot of different things. And then we have a practical question from Sarah. That last one was from Carol. Thank you, Carol. The one from Sarah was practical question. Long walks take a lot of time and energy. How do you balance the time spent walking with making time to write as you walk? So what I tend to do is I do always still carry a old school notebook and pen. But I do also make note of, I do make use of technology, and I will sometimes do voice memos on my phone. I find they're a really, really handy way to record a thought. If I don't, especially sometimes my thoughts are very quick. I speak quite quickly sometimes, and I need to read, I need to just get it out there. So I do a voice note, and sometimes I make notes in my notes if I want to kind of write something down. So I'd say I definitely do that, but don't be afraid to go back if you've made notes. But I think the more important thing to make a note of is your personal reaction, because you won't be able to remember that. And make notes of things like smells or sounds, or, you know, something that struck you, like, you know, the sound of a teak leaf when you step on it sounds like a poppadom, like those kind of things, that those connections you've made, you won't remember them, but you can always go back and look at the view, and you can always go back and go, was that a, you know, an ash tree, or was it, you know, a yew tree? Whereas the feelings and the emotional kind of feeling that you get from a place, that will go away. So definitely make a note of your senses. And yeah, and on that note, I'd just like to say thank you all for having me, for listening to me, for your lovely questions. And I hope if you've read the book, you enjoyed it. If you haven't read the book, you might consider doing it. It's also always available as an audiobook if you prefer that. And I hope you manage to go walking, and wherever you go, you know, walk well. I hope it helps you.
Well, that's brilliant, and a really big thank you, Phoebe. That's been a fantastic hour. But Phoebe, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you so much.